Welcome to the Winners Find a Way show and podcast with your host, Trent M Clark, 3-time World Series coach, CEO of Leadershipity, serial entrepreneur, having started 12 companies, coach to the 1%, and an international speaker. This show is going to be your go-to podcast for facing adversity, being inspired, and overcoming obstacles, all from the best in the world, business, sports, and leadership. Need to hydrate but tired of plain old water? You need Rebellious Infusions. No sugar, no calories, loaded with antioxidants to boost your immune system. And L-theanine for brain health. 10 organic flavors and convenient liquid packets. Just add 16 ounces and you are on your way. Rethink your drink at drinkrebellious.com. For 10% off of your next purchase, use the code 99999.
Yeah, so it was, yesterday being Marine Corps birthday, 247 years, I believe, right? And so James, you remember James,
Sure, I know James, yeah.
He calls me and he says, "Hey, happy birthday, Marine. I just want to thank you for always pushing in me and believing in me and doing it." And I was like, "Man, you made it easy to believe in you, though. This guy can sell, dude. He could go to Guantanamo Bay, open the cell door to a terrorist who's being waterboarded 15 times a day and sell that guy water." Right. It's just amazing what he can do with people because he's just talented. He's actually so talented that it annoys me. Right. I don't, that's the reason I brought the guy with me. Yeah. Right. But he's just so talented that I'm like, man, I'm great at sales, but he's greater and he's natural at it. Like I got to work at it. Right. Yeah. He doesn't have to work at it. You go to him and you're like, I don't know, it was interesting because it's one of my favorite books. The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. You go, hey, go sell 1 million of these books. He'd do it 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Or like Ricky, my longest friend, right? We enlisted in the Marines together, friends since the second grade. And he made the jump. So when we got out of the Marines, he became a cop too. And then he retired out of that and was teaching high school. And I said, hey, come with me. And he left the security of doing that. Yeah. And he was like, yeah. And and this year was a challenging year. I think, and it's really funny. I don't think I've talked to one single person that said 2022. Like they go, 2022 is really made 2020 its bitch, right? Right. Like the COVID year of pandemic when everything closed down doesn't hold a candle to 2022. But the thing is even though it's had a lot of challenges, I embrace it, right? And I'm like, man, but look at all the things we learned. What to do and what not to do. And it's one of the reasons why when we started with acquisitioning TCU off-campus houses, we started off with 8 and we had a year's worth of case studies and I had enough to go to investors. And it only took us 9 months to scale to 45 to become the largest holder of houses off campus. And we're still cooking, right? Like we'll be 100 by midsummer. And people are like, how are you doing it? And I was like, well, when you demonstrate that you walk the walk, those that are sitting on the sidelines, they start paying attention. And the ones that have been sitting on the sidelines, you pay attention to the ones that go, I don't want to sit on the sidelines anymore. Yeah. I want to give you money, or I want to invest in you, or I want to be with you and be a part of you. And they come along, and watching Ricky, develop his acumen, watching Dustin, right? The whole Army Ranger, watching his progress over the last 90 days has just been fascinating. But you got to believe in people and you got to give them the runway, right? And that's hard to do as a leader. It is so hard to do as a leader, is to step back and go, okay, go, and you're sitting there watching them sometimes go towards the wall and you're like, please don't go towards the wall, but you got to let them. You got to let them.
Let's talk James for a second, right? Yeah. You just said, if you don't give him the runway, how would you ever discover his talent for sales? Because you could always go like, hey, I've got a great talent for sales. Let me show you how it's done. Well, I don't want to risk this sale because you need to just watch me through this. You learned that he has this talent by giving him the room to do it. And you were like, wait a minute, that's a pretty good deal. Like I should be doing it that way. Wait a minute. I like that right there. And so it's one of these things when you surround yourself with people that are willing to get in the game.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to find out that, listen, the people coming out of I'm going to use football because TCU is great right now, right? Yeah. They're hot.
Oh yeah.
And listen, like you take a look on the field, like the jerseys are dirty. There's blood coming out of the nose, man. You're scraped up. You're limping. And it's tough out there. Like it's not for the faint at heart. Like, you want to come out into this game and step in the size, come ready. And this is probably my biggest, challenge for the media that kind of that paints this picture like, hey, get a website. You're in business. Entrepreneurship is easy. I'm like, oh my gosh, this game, like, I don't know if you've been punched in the nose 5 times, but you should go do that with your hands behind your back and then go, okay, I think I'm ready for this now. Because if you don't want that and you can't take that, I don't know if this game's for you.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's really important, and football is a great analogy for this. And, we really learned this in the Marines. I learned it in the PD. Well, it was reinforced in the PD. I'd already learned it in the Marines. Is you're never out of the fight unless you choose to be out of the fight.
Yeah.
Right. It's not over until it's over. Stay in the fight. Like I remember when I was going through the police academy and there was 30 of us in our class, 22 of us were vets. Of the 22 vets, 15 of us were Marines. And there was another Force Recon Marine, Greg Jones, big dude, towered over everybody. So it came time for boxing. And the instructor was like, hey, who's got Golden Gloves experience? I was the only one to raise my hand. And they were like, okay, you get to pick who you want. I said, I want Jones. And everybody turned around and looked at me. He was like, man,
like, what are you doing?
Class, why are you going to pick the biggest dude? And I totally talked trash to him for a week. I was like, man, I'm going to dust you. And even if I don't, there's no way I lose here. He's like, no, you're going to lose. I said, no, there is no loss. I'm fighting the biggest dude in class. If you win, you're the biggest dude in class. Of course you won. But if I win, the loudest dude in class beat you. And he told me later, right? He was like, man, I started getting a little nervous because, man, you were getting in my head. So we get there in the day, like we're up there on the speed bag and, it's a technique. So he's trying to, big old bear paws trying to hit this thing. And I'm over there hitting it right. And he's like, man, he tells me later, he's like, man, this guy really does know how to do this. Then we get on the heavy bag, right? And he's like, well, I can't hit that hard though. I'm bigger than him. And he saw me working the heavy bag. He's like, man, he's got some pretty solid punches on that thing. So we get into the ring, right? And when they ring the bell, my strategy was I'm just going to let him get tired because he's a big guy. It's going to get tired. So as soon as they did it, I hit him with an uppercut. And man, I tucked in, right? I was taking the blows, right? I knew how to take the hits. And I could feel towards the end of the first round, they were getting softer and softer and softer. Yeah. And so, we go to the second round. And so the guy, the coach in my corner is like, dude, you got a shot at the big guy. He goes, wear him out on the second one. So we get in there and instead of fake an uppercut, but I come down and I hit him with a hook, right? Didn't ring his bell too much, but it was enough to piss him off where he's just wailing me, throwing some haymakers. And I felt him getting softer and softer. But like all good plans, Trent, not everything goes according to plan. So he got frustrated and he towers over me. So he hammer fists me on top of my head. And it caused me to bounce my head out of my guard. And when my head came out of my guard, he rang my bell hard. Yeah. And man, the hits were coming. So it was towards the end of the second round and we finish up and I'm over in the corner and the coach is like, dude, he's done. Go get him. I was like, sure, no problem. Which one is I see like 15 of them right now.
Which one do I hit?
Yeah. And he spent the third round just whooping my ass from one side of the ring to the next, right? So it was all said and done. Everybody was like, because he told me, he was like, man, when your head came out of the guard, I knew that I had to take my shot because there was no way I was going to make it the third round. And everybody's like, why did you fight Greg? And I was like, well, 3 reasons. I said, first off, I wanted everybody here to see that I fear no man except for my father. He's the only one I've ever feared, and I will always fear, even if he's 80 years old in a wheelchair, and he's pretty close to 80, but he's not in a wheelchair. And so I said, I want everybody to see that I'm not scared of anybody, and I'll fight to the death with you. And I said, the second reason is when you get on the radio and you call for help and you hear me coming, you know I'm coming. And I didn't say anything. And then finally somebody goes, well, what was the third reason? I said, the third reason was the most important. And they said, what was that reason? I said, man, I hadn't had a good ass whooping in a while. And sometimes you need one to put perspective on stuff.
I want to dive into that because it's funny. We talk about today now, like comforts and this and that. And you've got an interesting take on perspective versus perception, right? And, it's always, I've probably said 1,000 times, perception's reality, right? Because people get perception on people, and then it becomes their reality. Whether it's true or not, that's a whole nother matter, right? But man, you and I talked about, as athletes, as military, we develop a prioritization perspective because we realize like you can't do it all. I've got to decide where my best contributions, where my best energies are going to be spent to help this unit, this organization be the best it can be. And I can't be the sales guy, the marketing guy, the banker, it can't be it all. So how am I going to service best? And same thing on the field. So talk to me a little bit about your position on perspective versus perception.
Yeah, I think it's critical, right? Because perception is reinforced by bias, emotions, feelings, experience, things like that. But perspective is when you ask questions, right? So, and funny enough, the obstacle is the way, right? I've read this book, and this is not an exaggeration, 100 times.
Really?
I've taken out. I got a whole stack of them right here behind me. I hand them out.
I love that, man. How come Clark's never been on that mailing list, man?
What's that?
I said, how come Clark never got on that mailing list, man?
And you know what? I'm going to send one to you.
I love it.
I'm going to send one to you today. As soon as we finish this, I'm going to send one to you today. I need to get you a recon t-shirt so that way you're not wearing one of those, silly ass SEALs t-shirts.
That's SEAL BS. Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So perspective is when something or someone happens, which is going to happen. Most of the time, people allow their perception to occur, and then they act, don't act, accept, don't accept, so forth. Perspective is when something or someone happens, go ahead and accept it. It's already done. It's in the past, right? Accept it and then ask questions. What can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? Is there anything within my control? And if it's not within my control, is there a workaround? And if there's no control and no workaround, then leave it alone because you're a hamster on a wheel, spending a whole lot of time and energy going nowhere real quick, right?
Yeah.
Learn and observe from it what you can take away. And so we have a saying in our companies called the quadrant of death. And there's 4.
I want that t-shirt too, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Death, man. You got t-shirts made of that.
You and I build another company together and we sell these t-shirts, right?
Believe it, bro.
And so the quadrant of death is ego, entitlement, blame, shame. And if you're operating in any one of those, that's not good. If you're operating in 2 of the 4 at any time, that's bad. If you're operating in 3 of the 4, that is dangerous. And if you're operating in 4 of the 4, it's catastrophic. So we have a saying in the company, and we call it, like in the military, you have what's called ceasefire, right? So if somebody witnesses an unsafe situation, they say ceasefire, ceasefire, and everybody starts repeating ceasefire, ceasefire, and everybody stops, but looks around, and then you adjust the situation. We had the same thing is anytime, and they can do it to me because I find myself in the quadrant at times, right? Sure. And so, hey, you're in the quadrant, get out of the quadrant. Ego's the biggest one that I fall in, right? And so they're like
number one, right? That's why it's number one, because we go easy. It's easy to get there.
It's easy to get there, but the biggest one we see a lot of times is blame, right? You're blaming. Why are you blaming, right? Well, that person did me wrong. Okay, maybe they did. Are you going to live in this I'm angry blaming? And so what you have to do is I have a very structured morning, and I'm not a structured person. I hate routines. I mean, like on Culture Index, I'm a low D, right? I'm a nonconformist. I hate rule. I don't want to break any laws because I don't want to go to jail, but I want to break all the rules, right? It's a typical entrepreneur. I want to disrupt, but I have to be structured in my morning routine. And you and I talked about it on our show, right? When you recorded with me, it's the Oak Journal. Right. I start my 10-10-10 off of as I use an app called Calm, and it's 10 minutes of just breathing and meditation, which is really hard. I found it easier to be trained to be one of the best killers on the planet, to go kill enemies, than it is to sit there for 10 minutes and focus and breathe and block everything out of your head. It's exhausting. right? It's hard, but I reinforce and I still do it. And sometimes I got all these thoughts coming in, but I still do the 10 minutes. Then I do my 10 minutes of journaling. Then I do my 10 minutes of reading, right? So here, another EO or Vern Harnish, right? Scaling up, right? Yep. And so that's been my book here that I've been working on for my 10-10-10, but I breathe. And so when something or someone happens, pause, and I remember to breathe because it's going to be okay. Because you want to know when it's not okay? When someone's punched your ticket.
Yeah.
The only person that decides our ticket's going to get punched is the man upstairs. He's already predetermined that. Matter of fact, I think it's one of the reasons I've been alive for almost 50 years now. Half a century is because I'm cable TV for God. He's like, man, I can't let him go because he's goofy stuff.
This channel's too good.
It's too good. It's too good, right? But you just got to breathe. Just remember to breathe. Like people would say, like, man, like, you know, when the enemy's shooting at you and bombs are going off and everything else, how do you stay so calm? And I was like, you just breathe, right? Because people are just spraying and praying, you know, shooting all over the place. Just breathe, look up, acquire your target, squeeze the trigger, go back down, breathe, get up. Look at the same thing in business. What is the current target? Breathe, acquire. Get your sight alignment, squeeze the trigger, take that next target down, and then stay calm because, you know, of course, being a Marine, right? Water's the most powerful thing on the planet. It's the biggest necessity on the planet, right? You can go without eating, but you can't go without hydration, right? You're an athlete. I mean, you kind of been to the World Series a handful of times and stuff, right? Yeah. You got to hydrate. Well, water is also a powerful entity because it'll just go anywhere, right? I mean, tsunamis, look at them. And people go, well, I think fire is worse. And I was like, no, because fire's got to have fuel. And when you take the fuel out, it's got nothing to burn, right? So if you're in a tense situation, why fuel the fire? Why raise your voice? Why yell? Why add more fuel to it? Remain calm. So when a young man I'm mentoring is dealing with a difficult employee situation, he's like, man, I think this guy's crazy, but I need to terminate him. And so last week when he was like, man, I just need to fire him today. And I says, no, give it a few days. And he goes, why? I already know that I'm going to fire him. And I said, yeah, but you know what? No matter how justified you are in terminating an employee, even your best employees even if you have 100 people in a company and 99 go, that guy needs to be fired. When you fire that person, it has a reaction to everybody because they immediately not feel safe, even if they are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And I said, what you're doing is you're demonstrating restraint and that you're going to gather all the information. You're going to talk to all the employees and you're going to interview everybody and you're going to do that. I'm not saying don't do it, but when you demonstrate that restraint, what you're doing is you're saying, we made a decision that we needed to make as a company, but I'm not leaving you with the feeling of feeling unsafe. Show that restraint, show that patience, show that, right? But you have to show that. So just breathe, be calm.
Yeah, that's so good. Let me go real quick on the quadrant of death. Give me your scoring on that, right? Yeah. I know the ego, entitlement, blame, shame. We talked about the 4 losing behaviors on your show, right?
Yeah.
And then when one's happening, it's what?
Not good.
Not good. 2 happens.
Bad.
3 happens.
Dangerous.
Danger. 4 happens.
Catastrophic. Don't ask me how to spell catastrophic.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think organizations, I mean, you know, I do this for a living, right?
Yeah.
So I go into organizations and my guess is that at any given moment, they probably called me because 2 are going on and likely 3, right? Because it's like, whoa, this is all going on. And it's like, whoa, we got to get this taken care of. We got to get out of this quadrant because like, it's not good. And this behavior's not okay. I mean, and you know, ego is probably it's such a tough one to always see it, you know, identify it, know this is what it is. But blame is, you know, crazy. Entitlement is prevalent. And those 2 ones. And then of course, the shame one is a scary one, right? Because when people get in a shame cycle, really bad things happen, right? Because we're not thinking in our right mind. Because when you're in a shame cycle, you know, that little voice is telling you things that just aren't even logical. It's not making sense. But and usually we're listening to that little voice in that cycle. Like it's prevalent. Like it's the loudest voice in the shame cycle. Like, yeah, you're lousy. You don't belong here. You're not anything. You're awful. And you're like, yeah, depression kicks in and these things happen. So it's bonkers, man. But let me pivot to, one thing very interesting about you is like you used to jump out of airplanes. One thing that most people don't know about you, I'm going to say two things that people don't know about you, right? One is that you used to jump out of airplanes in the Marines, and you're definitely afraid of heights, which cracks me up.
Terrifying.
And then two, you train dogs for high level training, went through a really tough time with one of those deaths and losing one of those key, relationships in your life. And now you're a cat guy, right?
Even my coffee cup, best cat dad ever. And
Best cat dad ever. Wow.
The dog's
That's,
Stella.
It's a big flip switch to go from dogs to cats, man, or vice versa. By the way, either one. Big
right. So it was funny. So Stella was the last service dog I trained, and I took her out of service when my daughter was 12, and so she'd be my daughter's babysitter. And people would go, "Hey, who's babysitting your kid?" And I was like, "Nobody." And they're like, "Well, what do you mean nobody?" And I was like, "Well, I got Stella." And they're like, "What if somebody breaks in your house?" I'm gonna be like, "Man, they thought they're gonna think they met a blender, right?" Because Stella,
that's not a
concern. You had a bite, and she was a great work dog, right? And so a year and a half ago, her mind was still there, but her hips, with Belgian Malinois, they experience this hip dysplasia, right? Yep. And if she just couldn't move, and so we had to take her down to the vet and put her down, and I was angry. I was just so mad. And as a matter of fact, we got about a mile from there, and I pulled over on the side of the road, and I was just walking up and down the road, kicking rocks. I was just mad about this.
Yeah.
Because she had been just this entity for my daughter, and I always felt safe for my daughter because of Stella. And so we were down there, and man, the poor vet, she was like, "Man, I'm sorry, but sometimes we have to euthanize our animals." And I was like, "Well, it was a hell of a lot easier euthanizing people when I was in the Marines, because man, this is just, this was my dog, and then everybody's kind of sitting there like, oh, yeah. And I said, so I was really down about it, right? Because she lived to be 16 years old, which is a long time for a Belgian Malinois.
Yeah.
Right. And so my wife goes, "Hey, we're going to go down and we're going to get a cat." I say, "I ain't getting no cat." So I'm not a cat guy. I'm not getting a cat. She goes, "You can go with me, help me pick one out, or I'm coming back with whatever one I find." Fine. So we get in there, and my cat's name is Hooter Smooch, and I call her my sweet smooches, and Laura calls her Hootie Hoo. And matter of fact, we have a sign at our house, for our address that says Hootie's Haven, right? And we've totally gotten crazy over this cat. And I said, if we're going to get a cat, I'm going to train her like a dog. So she's leash trained. She goes on hikes with us. We took her to Alaska. I trained her.
You're the guy in the commercial. They got the commercial now about the cat, right?
Oh, I'm telling you, it was funny. My wife was like, "How did you train her?" And so my dad was up seeing me a couple months ago, and he's like, "Man, it's funny. That cat follows you everywhere you go. Anytime, the cat's always looking where you're at." And it's just, and I was like, yeah. And I just, it was just kind of funny. And as a matter of fact, my wife sent me a photo this morning. She got knocked over a bunch of stuff. She goes, she never misbehaves when you're here. She goes, she's acting out because you're not here. And, but it was just kind of funny. I was like, hey, I'm going to get a cat. I'm going to train it like a dog, because anything can be done, because you got to get comfortable with uncomfortable. Like, I'm terrified of heights. Like, when I say terrified, like, man, my place up in Colorado. Yeah. I go skiing all the time. And anytime that lift stops and it's sitting there swinging because some idiot screwed up getting off, right? And I'm sitting there like, and my wife, because she knows me well enough that she knows, but nobody else could tell. She's like, "You're terrified right now, aren't you?" I was like,
"Be cool, man. Be cool."
Hey, crap my pants right now. Like, this sucks.
That's cool.
So, but you got to get comfortable with uncomfortable. And go jump out of airplanes, go bungee jump, and do those things that you're terrified of, because there are always going to be things in life that you're scared of.
Yeah, man. Jeremy Spann, this has been awesome. We got to wrap up. Just such a good time. Thank you so much for the time. I've learned so much. Say what you need, not what you want. Do what you need, not what you want to do. Getting out of your comfort zone, perspective versus perception, the quadrant of death, ego, entitlement, blame, and shame. and the dangerous level of those. Respond, not react. So good. No mistakes, learning opportunities, data to back it up. You make your decisions, you data. And the story of the devil dogs and how they can, most people don't know that story. It's so good. And then our good friend, Brian Scudamore, right? The WTF, the willing to fail, go out there. But for my good friend, Jeremy Spann, thank you for joining us on the Winners Find a Way show. Of course, I am always reminded of Semper Fidelis, Semper Fi, always faithful. Thank you on this Veterans Day for joining us. Jeremy Spann, you are always faithful, and I'm so blessed for our relationship and our friendship, my man. Thank you for joining me, brother.
Thank you, Trent. I was really honored that you reached out to have me do this on today of all days.
Yeah. For everybody else, Winners Find a Way every week, Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. Join us and hear more great people like Jeremy Spann. You will be a winner. You will find your way. See you next time.
Rebellious Infusions are organic flavored water enhancers. Rebellious provides clean, focused energy in liquid packets. Just tear the corner of the packet and pour 16 ounces of water. Rebellious Infusions have no sugar, no calories, and up to 300 milligrams of antioxidants and loads of L-theanine for brain health. Rethink your drink at drinkrebellious.com. For 10% off of your next purchase, use the code 99999. Do you want to be our next guest? Or do you have inspiring stories to share? Or do you love to inspire, support, and empower thought leaders? Feel free to send Trent a direct message on Instagram or Facebook at Leadershipity.